The enteric nervous system, which is the solar plexus largely, has a total neuron count as big as the brainstem and the entire spinal cord. So it literally, like a lot of people don't realize, there is literally a brain-sized network in the gut system. And that's a very significant, I mean, when you look at the size of the nervous system of the heart, I can't remember exactly how many neurons it is, but it's a tiny little thing compared to the solar plexus or the the gut brain. But it also, heart mass research and many others shows how massively important it is to our overall capacity for empathy and for connection and for precognitive awareness, and things like that. So if but the point I'm making is if you look at the size of the heart's nervous system, which is integral to the heart because it goes with the heart when they do a heart transplant, and you say, okay, well, if that's that powerful, how powerful must the solar plexus or the abdominal brain and pelvic brain be? It's it's very, very significant, but still to this day hardly even thought about. And so the system I was going to mention is the biophoton system, because the biophoton system communicates at the speed of light. It was identified by the research of Fritz Albert Popp and has been expanded. I've got entire books on it in my library. But without a long to do, it's another system of communication beyond a myelin pathway or a neurological pathway, beyond a chemical pathway, and it's faster by far than chemicals or nerve conduction, and it's very, very real. And when we're talking, and I'm listening to you talk about all this and the bacteria, I feel inspired to share something very interesting with you. I don't know if you've ever spent any time communicating with plants or subtle energies, but I do a lot of that work. I have to read people's energies fields and communicate with their bodies. And I communicate regularly with all living things. And an experiment you can do that's quite profound. If you take a glass of drinking water and just direct your consciousness to it and put your hands close to it, and say to the water with your intention directed at it, if you can hear me, expand the energy coming out of you, and you'll feel a surge of energy come out of it. There's no question water's conscious.
Yes.
Now, of course, water's also full of bacteria and living organisms. But if you do that for a little bit and communicate with it, ask it questions and things like that, then I started testing this with Bioptimizer's microbiome breakthrough product, which is a gut support bacterial product. If you stir a scoop of that into the water and then you start talking to it, the level of consciousness goes up radically. The speed that it communicates, the energy that it produces, it's just like you take the water and it just like supercharges it. And so through these experiments I was doing, I learned, wow, the bacteria are like a wildly powerful form of intelligence and life, that a lot of people just are totally disconnected with because their consciousness is so trapped in their left brain that they're detached from the language of nature.
Exactly. And it's an interesting point, Paul, and that's where, I'm sort of full spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And so I definitely have a hat that's in kind of the traditional allopathic world, but I've been exploring a lot of this other stuff myself, right? Because at the end of the day, this is sort of an insider job to remind us all, meeting as many people sort of where they are cognitively.
Yeah.
That we're participants in nature, right? It's as we discussed yesterday, reminding people that we have an ecology within us, and that's fractal of our participation in the larger ecology. And I've had my own experiences actually when I was doing breath work, when I first started doing breath work, and I'm a free diver. So, I learned very early on. That was actually, I think, a big paradigm shift for me, because I was right in the middle. I was actually starting out my, traditional biopharmaceutical career, and I started freediving and took control of my autonomic nervous system. And I said, oh, I'm doing stuff that you talk to most doctors, they're like, you can't control your heart rate consciously. I'm like, I'm doing that. And, I'm diving hundreds of feet, and proving that's the case. So when I started doing breath work, what actually came up to me was I was listening to something and I was trying to figure out what it was. And I called them the community, and it was my microbiome and the cells in my body that those were directly interfacing with. And I recognized that there was a level of consciousness there, a very different one. And also I recognize that it's a quantum consciousness, right?
Yes, it is.
Because when we think about, and I think this is the next frontier of understanding the microbiome, is we can only see what is culturable, right? But we can culture. But when you talk about biophotons, right? When we talk about bacteria that can directly feed off of electrons, right? We're not culturing those, but we know from some of the, it's probably like the Antarctic, like the extremophile type research, that they're putting battery probes into soil and they're saying, wait a second, there are microbes on this and they're feeding directly on quantum particles.
Yeah, and there's a whole field now of quantum biology.
Exactly. And so we don't even know what's happening on a full ecological level because we can't culture it. And what we know is that these keystone species are cross-feeding, and, they're upstream of probably some dark matter, of a dark matter ecosystem that we can't even comprehend quite yet.
Are you confused about your life's purpose or wondering why you're really here? Don't feel alone. It's pretty common today. Guess what? You can join my Spirit Gym community, have access to my Master Key lessons, and get my support and guidance and the support of our awesome community to find your life's purpose and do all the inner work necessary to really resolve unresolved challenges, heal, grow, and identify exactly why you're here and what gems you came to give the world. If you want to join us, you're welcome to join my Spirit Gym community.
Yeah, potentially dark matter. That's a debatable theory.
Well, I'm just using that as a term,
an X factor.
As an X factor, just that there's a hidden, a sort of a shadow ecosystem that's cross-feeding on molecules that we can't culture effectively and see. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
You reminded me of a profound experience I had many years ago. I started doing research with psychedelics in 2006. I did a year of training with a doctor that uses them to help people heal clinically. And so I spent a year working as an assistant to conduct these healing ceremonies to learn how to use them. And I did, in that first year, I did about 50 journeys with him, and I would trade him work on his body for his watching over me and guiding me. And so it opened me up so much, and it was just such a profound expansion of my conscious connection to everything around me, and also a great way to explore a lot of my shall we say hypothesis about God and life. And I was visiting my mother in Ashland, Oregon many years ago, and I can't remember the name of the park there in Ashland. It's a beautiful, beautiful park, the huge mountainous park right down in the city, starts out in the city of Ashland, Oregon. And at the time, I was doing a lot of research with LSD. And so my soul directed me to take 5 hits of LSD, so probably
Wow.
5 times 75. I think those are 75 microgram hits, maybe 100. Enough of a dose to really open you up.
Yeah.
And my soul guided me to a creek and told me to lay down next to the creek. And so I it took me about an hour to hike to this place. I took the medicine at the start of the hike, and I always carry my notebooks and my art stuff. I carry, colored watercolor pens and things like that, because I like to do art to describe what I'm seeing and feeling. And I was laying next to this creek, and all of a sudden I began hearing this conversation, was all I could say. Like, there was a wild conversation, and I could sense it communicating not only with me, but it was as though the whole creek was talking to itself. And I said to my soul, what on earth am I hearing? And my soul directed my eyes to the water, and my soul said, you are hearing the bacterial colonies in the creek communicating with all the plants and even the fish in the water, and they're all talking to each other. And that's how they regulate the health of their own ecosystem. They work together to do that. It was just a mind-blowing experience. I laid there for probably 5 hours, completely blown away. And then I would hear a certain sound, and my soul would direct my eyes, and I would see a fish or a crayfish, and I would be able to isolate which sounds were coming from which of these organisms. And so, this is only to say that what's inside of us is all around us, which brings up a point. I created an acronym I'd love to share with you that I teach in my holistic lifestyle coaching program. It's called the ECHO, ECHO, and it stands for energy, chemistry, hydration, organisms. And so what I teach my students in their training is that everything that we eat or relate to is a form of energy. Everything we eat or drink is a form of chemistry, and we have to be adequately hydrated or we'll have health problems, and we have to pay attention to the organisms we eat. And whatever we do to the energy, chemistry, hydration, or organisms, water or organisms in the environment will directly impact us. And so I show how if you make the purchases of the foods and support the farmers that are taking care of the energy, chemistry, hydration, and organisms of the land, and you eat that food, then you mutually support yourself. And so you become conscious and coherent and interconnected with, even at whether it's conscious or not, it'll be at the unconscious level. And so you naturally begin to become more aware of life in and around you and make life affirmative choices. Yep. But if you start spraying glyphosate everywhere and pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, and drugging yourself and using antibiotics, then what happens is you begin to behave in a way that furthers the same behavior in the environment, which further cuts you off from the environment. So basically, you either create the pendulum of life or the pendulum of death. But it's human beings, unfortunately, with the powers of their cerebral cortex, that are making choices that are very against life and against the instincts. So we've now got this conundrum, which you described very well in your introduction of how you got here.